Hello, today we are going to be talking about cylinders, so finding surface area and volume of cylinders. So remember, surface area is talking about the amount of space on the outside, and then volume is talking about the amount of space on the inside. So when you draw a net of a cylinder, you are acting like you are cutting this cylinder on one of its sides. So like let's say I'm cutting it from here to here, and I were to open this up and lay it down flat, it's going to be a rectangle. So the side is going to be a rectangle. So when I open it up and lay it down flat, your two sides would just fall down and it would become a rectangle. And then your circles, so the top and the bottom, is still going to be attached to the side. They're just kind of going to fall at like on the top here and at the bottom. So I always tell my students that it kind of just looks like a division sign, like a bigger division sign. So that's an easiest way to remember your surface area, so your net. All right, so here's the net of a cylinder, and now I'm just going to start putting my measurements where they belong over here. So notice how the height was talking about the height of the side. So the height of the side, if I were to lay it down flat, would be this side over here. So these sides on your rectangles are 5s. And then they give us a radius of 3, which would be represented by the circles. So if you guys remember, when you find area from a net, you first just have to find the area of the rectangle, then you have to find the area of the circles, then you add them together, okay? So let's do the circle first. So if you guys remember the area formula of a circle, and let's do that over here, is pi r squared. Okay, so just start plugging in your numbers. So pi is 3.14. R is your radius, and if you guys notice, your radii are 3, so we're going to plug in 3 for R, and then we're going to square it. So in your calculator, you're just going to take 3 squared, which is 9, times 3.14, and that gives us 28.26. Now, the thing that you guys need to remember, though, is when you figure out the area, you just figured out the area of one circle, but how many circles do we have? We have 2 circles. So once you figure out the area of one circle, you're just going to take that area times 2 for both of them. So 28.26 times 2 gives us 56.52. And that gives us the area of both circles. All right, so now moving on to the rectangle. So remember, the area formula of a rectangle is just length times width. And notice how we only have the width, we don't have the length. So what do? Well, this is the hardest thing about the nets of a cylinder, is you have to remember that the length of your rectangle is just the circumference of your circle. And you're like, Mrs. Reed, what does that mean? Well, if I were to cut this cylinder open and lay it down flat, the length of this, so your length of the rectangle, is the outside of the top. So what measurement, or what do we talk about that talks about the distance around the outside of the top? Well, circumference. So that's where that's coming from. So when you open this up and lay it down flat, you have this side that's going to come out, and you have this side that's going to come out, and your two sides are just going to fall down flat here, and that would be represented by the outside of the circle. So that would be your circumference. So before we can find the area of the rectangle, we first need to find out the circumference of the circle to get this length right here. So if you guys remember, circumference is 2 pi r or pi d. So depending on what they give us, we want the formula that has, so in this case they gave us radius, so I want 2 pi r as my formula. And just plug in your numbers, so pi is 3.14, radius is 3, that came from the circle. So just multiply all those numbers together and we get 18.84. So your circumference is the length of the rectangle, and that is 18.84. Okay, now we can find the area of the rectangle because now we have our length and now we have our width. So I'm just going to take 18.84 times my width of 5, and I get 94.2. So the area of the rectangle is 94.2. And if you guys remember, when we have a net, you have a complex figure, so we need to add up all the areas. So my last step is just adding up the 56.52, which was the area of the circles, plus my area of the rectangle, which is 94.2. And we get a total area of 150.72. Oh, I forgot my units. So we are in centimeters, so it'll be centimeters squared. All right, and then 40% of the surface area of means multiply, so you're taking 40% times your surface area that you got up here. Remember though, you can't multiply with percents, you have to change it to a decimal. So 40% as a decimal is 0.40, so 0.40 times your 150.72 gives us 60.288, and that would be centimeters squared. All right, so let's try the next one. So draw the net and then label the measurements. So remember, if I were to open this up from right here and lay it down flat, the two sides will fall and make a rectangle. And then your two circles would still be attached to the sides at the top and at the bottom. All right, so let's label this circle. So here we have a radius of 20 for the circles. So our two radii will be 20. And then remember, the height of the cylinder is represented over here on the side, talking about how tall the rectangle is. So 70 is over here. And then now we can start finding the areas, okay? So let's do the circles first. So remember, your area formula of a circle is pi r squared. Pi is represented by 3.14. Your radius of the circle was 20, and then we're going to square it. So in our calculators, we'll take 20 squared times 3.14, and that gives us 1256. But please remember that when you do this, 1256 is represented by one circle, so one of your circles on the cylinder. But remember, you have two circles that are the exact same. So once you get the area of your one circle, you need to multiply it by 2 to get the area of both of them. So, excuse me. So the area of both circles is going to be 2,512. Okay. All right, so now let's find the area of the rectangle. So your area of the rectangle is length times width. Remember though that we only have the width and not the length. So you guys need to remember that the length of the rectangle is from the circumference of the circle. So even just think about like me opening up this circle. So if I were to cut it and lay it down flat, notice how your sides are just going to lay on top of the length here. So that is talking about the outside of the circle, which is what we say circumference. Okay, so again, there's two circumference formulas, 2 pi r or pi d. So since they give us the radius, I'm going to use the 2 pi r formula. And then just start plugging in your numbers. So 2 times 3.14 times radius of 20. Multiply all those numbers, so 2 times 3.14 times 20 gives us 125.6. So that is the length of our rectangle. So now that I have my measurements for the rectangle, I can now just multiply those two numbers together. Since area is length times width, the length is 125.6, the width is 70. So multiply those two numbers, so 125.6 times 70 gives us a grand total of 8792. right, so the last thing we need to do is add those two numbers together to get the total surface area. So 2512 plus 8792 is 11304. All right, so then 1/5 of the surface area, 1/5 is just a fraction, so you're just going to take 1/5 times that. And we get 2260.8. Oh, I forgot my units again, so centimeters squared. So that is how you find the surface area of a cylinder. So your net looks like this. It looks like a big division symbol. And to find the surface area, you find the area of the two circles, add it to the area of the rectangle, and please remember that you have to find the length of the rectangle by finding the circumference of the circle first. Okay, so just like with rectangular prisms, we do have a formula that we can use instead of drawing the nets, and that formula to find surface area is 2 pi r squared h plus 2 pi r squared. So all that we would have to do is plug in your radius in for all the r's, plug in your height of the cylinder for all the h's, and then just solve it. So let's do that. So again, substitute just means you're plugging in numbers into the formula. So pi is 3.14, r means radius, which in this case our radius is 6. H is the height of the cylinder, so in this case it's going to be 3. Bring down the plus sign, and then we have 2 times pi, 3.14. R is radius, which is 6. Height is 3. So again, just like with rectangular prisms, since we have multiple stuff we're multiplying, go ahead and just multiply both of them first, and then we'll add them at the end. So let's do this first. So I see an exponent 6 squared, so that is 36. And then I'm just going to multiply it times the other numbers. So 6 squared, 36, times 2 times 3.14 times 3 gives me 678.24. And then I'm going to add it to the other set. So the other set, I'm just going to multiply these numbers. So 2 times 3.14 times 6 times 3 is 113.04. And then your last step is to just add those two numbers together, and we get a grand total of 791.28 inches squared. So again, the formula is a little bit easier than the net. So you are still expected to know how to do both, but on your test, we do give you guys the formula, okay? All right, so last one here, 35% of the surface area. 35% is 0.35. Of means multiply, so we're just going to take 0.35 times your 791.28, and we get 276.948 inches squared. All right, so if you guys want to pause the video and try doing the last one, please do. See if you guys can do it on your own. So go ahead and pause the video and then press play for the answer. All right, so for this one, you should have, so substitution, you should have plugged in 3.14 for pi. And your radius, if you plugged in 8 for r, you did it incorrectly because 8 is the diameter. Diameter is the line that goes all the way through the center of the circle over to the other side. And we want the radius, which is half of it. So to get the radius, you just take half of the diameter. So your r here should have been 4. So what you guys should have plugged in for r was 4. And then your height was that 6. Okay. So pi is 3.14, radius is 4, height is 6. And then you guys should have just started multiplying. So multiply the two sets first before you add them. So for the first set, I'm going to take 4 squared first, which is 16, times 2 times 3.14 times 6 gives us 602.88, plus, so 2 times 3.14 times 4 times 6 is 150.72. And then add those two numbers together and we get a grand total of 753.6 square feet. So good job if you guys got that, okay? Again, the hardest thing was just remembering that if they give you diameter, you have to cut it in half to get the radius. All right, and then 1/2 of the surface area, that just means you're taking 1/2 times your surface area, or in other words, just dividing it by 2. And you should have gotten 376.8 square feet. All right, so that is how you find surface area of a cylinder. So remember, surface area is talking about the amount of space on the outside of the shape. So if we're talking about a cylinder here, let's think of like a can of soup. So the manufacturers of the can of soup, if they want to put their label on it on the outside, they need to figure out the surface area to fit it on there perfectly. All right, moving on to the back side here. So now we're finding volume, so we're trying to figure out the amount of space on the inside of the object. And we just have a volume formula here, so it's pi r squared h. R is your radius and h is the height. So let's do the first one. So volume equals pi r squared h. Substitution, we're just going to plug our numbers into the formula. So pi is 3.14. Radius, oh, notice how they gave us diameter. So we need to divide it by 2. That gives us 5. So radius is 5, and we're going to square it. And then the height of it is 12. All right, so all we have to do now is just multiply those numbers. So always do the exponent first, so 5 squared. Then multiply it times 3.14, then 12, and you get a total answer of 942. Now please remember, this is volume, so we need our units to be cubic inches. So you need that little 3 up there instead of the 2. Area is squared, volume is cubed. All right, and then 35% of the volume, so just take that 0.35 times your volume, and you get 329.7 cubic inches. All right, so let's try the next one. So again, start with that volume formula, which is pi r squared h. Substitution, you're just plugging the numbers into the formula. So pi is 3.14. Radius, this time they do give us the radius, which is 2, and we're going to square it. And then the height of it is 5. And then now we can just plug it in our calculator. So 2 squared would give us 4. Then we can multiply it times 5 times 3.14, and that gives us 62.8 cubic feet. Alright, and then 1/2 of the volume, that just means we're taking 1/2 of 62.8, or in other words, divide by 2, and that's 125.6 cubic feet. Alright, so as you guys know, you can pause the video, but I want you guys to go ahead and pause it to work on the last one by yourself. This one said find the surface area, which we already did on the front side. So just skip that one and then go ahead and work on the last one here. So pause the video, see if you guys can get the answer without my help, and then press play to see if you guys got it correct. Okay, so you guys should be done. So you guys should have had the formula pi r squared h. When you guys did your substitution, you should have plugged in 3.14 for pi. R is your radius, which was 5 up there, and then the height was 9. So when you guys plugged in your numbers, you should have had 5 squared, which was 25, times 9 times 3.14, and you guys should have got 706.5 cubic inches. Then when you guys take 1/4 of that, so you're just multiplying times 1/4 or just dividing it by 4, you guys should have got 176.625 cubic inches. And that's it. So good job if you guys got that. That is it for today's lesson, so please let your teacher know if you have any questions.